Hey, everybody. Hope you're all doing well out there and had a great week. I'm Josh from the Audio Programmer. I'm here with some very special guests, and this is the Neural Audio Plugin Competition live stream number 5. And today we have a very special panel with some esteemed guests. And today we're going to be talking about AI and audio, current trends, what we see coming up for the future, thoughts about the latest development, and more. And this panel is going to be moderated by our great co-host, Christian Steinmetz. And we also have Andrew Fife, who is also another co-host along with us. Before we start the panel, maybe we could take a moment just to introduce ourselves and talk a little bit about what we do, where we're coming from, and where we're at. So maybe I'll call out your names to start off with. We'll start with Zach.
Hey, I'm Zach Evans. I am the director of Harmonai, Stability AI's audio research wing, and we're focused on generative audio models to help out musicians.
Great. David.
Hi, I'm David Trevelyan. I used to work at an AI generative music startup called JukeDeck, and now I work at TikTok, where I build real-time audio tooling for fun musical experiences. And recently we released the Morph plugin, which you might be familiar with. Super excited to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
Great. Anna.
Hi, I'm Anna. I am a research scientist at Magenta, and I'm also an adjunct professor at Mila, supervising students in kind of building interactive generative tools for musicians and novices. I also organized the AI song contest, and really excited about this contest. I feel like it's neural audio plugins really as the core of kind of finding ways to have these models in a human in the loop creative process. Very excited to be here.
Thank you. Ale.
Hi, everyone. I am Ale Koretzky. I'm the head of AI and audio science at Splice. Our team focuses on using AI to empower creators through discovery and creation technology. We built COSO by Splice that was released last year, and a lot more stuff coming. So pretty excited to be here.
Great. And our host, Andrew.
Yeah, hello everyone. If you've been following the streams so far for NAP, you probably see my face. So yeah, I'm Andrew from Cosmo, AI application engineer there. I'm also the team lead, project lead on the Newtone project. So we did a workshop to do with Newtone in one of the previous live streams. But yeah, being part of the organization team here with Josh and Christian on organizing NAP. So yeah, super excited to have another live stream and have this amazing panel with us today.
Okay. And our moderator, Christian.
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm Christian, and I'm a PhD student at Queen Mary University of London there in the Center for Digital Music. And my research focuses on neural audio effects and controlling audio effects with machine learning. So, of course, neural audio plugins is a huge interest for me. I'm also super excited for the discussion we're going to have today with all these amazing panelists from kind of all of these really great places that have worked and made significant contributions in this space of applying machine learning and AI in the context of music, and particularly in the context of kind of creating tools for music users or musicians. And so we've kind of prepared some questions for the discussion today that to try to shape a little bit the discussion of where we might take that. The topics of interest are kind of around AI in audio, but more specifically things like neural audio synthesis and generative AI that a lot of people are talking about, but also hope that we'll touch on a little bit about open source research and AI, and also kind of how AI plays with HCI in the context of this space, right? Because it's not just about AI algorithms for us. We're interested in how these are going to be used by people and how we can actually kind of make an impact, right? So I suggest we get right into it. And I want to start off kind of our first question. I actually want to kind of touch on that last point that I just mentioned. And until we get into the nitty gritty details, I kind of want to start at the higher level of this question around, why should, as people that want to build music tools, why is AI kind of one of those components that we want to use to build these tools, right? Because I think AI in general can fall into that problem of kind of like solution in search of a problem, right? Like, oh, AI algorithms are really cool, so we're just going to apply them to everything. And so what I want to kind of first ask is, what are the actual user problems that can be solved by AI, or that you're most interested can be solved by AI in the context of music? And so I think I'll pass that to Ale first to answer, in your experience, kind of how do you think about this problem when you're saying, how can AI help music creators and tools?
You said Ale, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Go for it.
Cool. I think that's a great question, because there's definitely been a case of AI is cool. Let's use AI first and then figure out what problem to solve. And I think we're finally moving away from that kind of mindset, and I think that's a good thing. The way I like to think about this is that when deployed the right way, AI can be really effective at capturing user intent in different modalities, and transforming that intent into what I call this 0 to 1 moment. And so maybe if you think about before AI, how do we manifest intent? Maybe search technology, free text search. Now maybe we're moving into a place where maybe my intent comes in the form of natural language, or a reference song that I like, or a mood, a feeling, a melodic idea. So the idea that now that the system can adapt to you in terms of how you want to manifest your intent and capture that effectively, that is my entry point when I think about, should AI be the underlying solution here. So yeah, that's part of one of the answer, is a more holistic answer. And a more specific answer, obviously there are specific problems that cannot be solved without AI, right? And we can think about, I don't know, some of these AI models in painting, outpainting capabilities, interpolation, creating continuations or variations given some input, timbre transfer. So, but yeah, I think that the summary is, we really need to think about, in terms of user value, what is this thing that we're trying to achieve at the end of the day, and go backwards and be very intentional in how we use AI, because it also comes with a challenge of, how do we keep the human at the center of the decision making? So yeah, that will be my answer.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, that's a lot of great points in there. I think what you mentioned kind of about the intent, conveying the intent of the user to the system, is a really key point there. I want to pass the question on to Anna now, because I know you've worked a lot in your research, right, in kind of answering some of those questions from the human-computer interaction side, of saying, like, how can we build interactive systems, right? Not only that kind of enable us to convey intent, but even do that in kind of a back and forth way, potentially. And I'm kind of curious, when you frame your research questions around that, what are you thinking, and how do you go about actually choosing which aspects of that problem to focus on?
Thank you. Yeah, I really like how Ali kind of captured how the core is about user intent of we have something we want to express, and being able to connect what we're imagining to actually realizing in music is kind of a classical problem we face even without AI. Kind of this music, yeah. How do you express ideas musically and feelings musically? Yeah, kind of adding to the 0 to 1 moment, which is kind of yeah, how do you go from an idea to kind of creating some musical material that supports that? I think AI can also be really helpful in the process of developing your ideas, helping you figure out if I'm stuck here in the moment, what are some things I could do next? Or maybe what are some things that other people might try, and be able to kind of maybe learn kind of trajectories of essentially the creative process as a process, and be able to kind of learn what happens in that creative process as ways to kind of help us figure out what can we do next, what can we try next, and maybe thinking about and music doesn't have to be like one result, one end kind of piece, but it could be like a meta piece that could have many different alternatives, and also maybe many different renditions depending on the context. Or for example, for video game music, being able to adapt to the scenario and still kind of capture some of that high level idea.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah. Yeah, David, did you have anything you wanted to add in on that aspect?
Yeah, definitely. I kind of want to pick up on the kind of the meta music Anna was touching on there, and say I think we can go also in the direction of you know, not just AI helping with creative output, but also in building creative tools like that. AI can kind of open that up to other people. You know, like in the past we've had creative tools. Let's say, take an example, a virtual piano, for example. Like actually being able to build a virtual piano takes a lot of resources, right? You need to kind of like, you need to pay people to record the piano or physically model it. You need to pay people to develop that virtual piano, and that's quite a big gate in front of being able to create those tools. But if you can do kind of something along the lines of what Andrew and the team at Cosmo are starting to do with Newtone, and that's you know, kind of possibly enable people to share tools that they have built where they can easily train their own AI models, that opens up a whole new world of tools that are kind of much more open to way more people to build. And I hope we see kind of like a much greater, you know, like a diversity of musical tooling as a result of it. So I think it also goes in that direction as well.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, Zach, I want to get you in this conversation, and I wonder if you could speak to from your experience, you know, putting out Dance Diffusion, right? Which was kind of very much like trying to get some idea out there about how could we have a diffusion model where people can train it on their own data,
right,
or run inference, or like explore the possibilities of the outputs. And I was wondering kind of, you know, when you were working on that and what I guess your goal is now, you know, how do you think about this question of what user problem you're solving? Because kind of, I guess some challenge that I might pose is like, from the research side, it's very easy for us to say like, hey, we just want to build a model that trains on a giant data set of music and synthesizes music. And I think kind of what I would, you know, we could push back on is like, well, what actual problem does that solve necessarily? And I think you get into this question of like, how are you going to prompt it, and what is the user interaction there? And I'm curious of your thoughts on that question.
Yeah. So with Dance Diffusion, you know, it was kind of inspired by the earlier diffusion models for images. There was the ImageNet diffusion model that OpenAI put out, and then that was combined with Clip to make Clip guided diffusion. And that was kind of the first, you know, that I guess after the Clip and VQGAN stuff was kind of what set off the text to image open source, you know, revolution, whatever you want to call it. Being able to combine the unconditional diffusion model with different kinds of guidances. And one of the things that really stood out to me there was that huge ImageNet model that, you know, disco diffusion was based on that. But there's also this model trained on the Elson bedroom data set, which is just a data set of a bunch of pictures of bedrooms. And so that model trained on that could make a bunch of pictures of bedrooms. And that was a 256 for 256 model as opposed to the 512 one, which was ImageNet. And what the community found was that model actually fine-tuned really well. So people like Kali Yuga made fine-tuning notebooks to be able to make their own personal diffusion models, instead of having it be like everyone has the same model and you can only make unique things by coming up with new prompts. This was, you can make your own model, and also it'll still work with the Clip guidance. So, you know, for example, making pixel art diffusion, or, you know, game item RPG diffusion, whatever, people having their own personal models, that really appealed to me for a few reasons. One, because it meant that people could make it more personal, as opposed to everyone using the same tool and kind of regressing to the mean of what that tool can do. Everyone, it kind of makes it even more unique. So if someone trains a model on their own sound design or their own stuff, that is, no one else can use that. No one else has that. So it makes it kind of solves that problem. People wanting unique sounds that are using new technology, and that can be personalized. So that was kind of one of the goals there, was just to see what is the, instead of trying to go for the huge data, here, this model knows everything, can do whatever you want. It's like, you know what you want ideally, or you can come up with ideas of what you want. Here is a tool that, the main default high resolution model is trained on music from Jonathan Mann. And most people are not going to want small clips of someone playing some guitar and, singing gibberish English, because the model doesn't model speech very well. But you can take that and then fine tune that on your sound design library, or on drums, and on a single GPU, or on a Colab notebook within a couple days, within even a couple hours, you can get a usable model that is now your own stuff. So I think that kind of low resource training is a really, really important thing, because that's what's going to enable people to make things more personal. So the problem that is solving there is, it's like things like interpolation. So that's the thing. There's like a Synaptic Morph is a popular plugin for doing FFT interpolations, trying to take different sounds and find the sounds between them. Using things like spectral analysis, FFTs, to do that, you get a certain way of doing it. But what diffusion models and AI allow you to do is more of a semantic interpolation, kind of a higher level interpolation. So it helps with like there being new math for sound design. And that was one of the things I really wanted, was that, I come from the electronic music producer community, and I'm spending all my time on Discord, seeing people talking about the details of, look ahead milliseconds and compressors, and all the resonances and peaks and delays and things are really high tech stuff. But seeing it's all kind of going around the same math that we've had for the last 50, 60 years or whatever, of, convolutions, delays. And I feel like it's kind of a limit being hit in terms of what mathematical operations people have to apply to their sound for their signal processing. And bringing in AI and neural audio kind of helps bring new math. Like, instead of here is this thing and I put a reverb on it, it's here's this thing and I did an interpolation with this sound through this model. One of the other things I think is important when you're making music tools is to be aware that whatever use case you're building it for is very likely not going to be what it's being used for. And that is, I love that. That's what I look for. That's why I'm so excited to make things like Dance Diffusion, to say, here is a base tool. Now I'm going to give it to people who are way better and way more creative than me, and they'll do things I would never expect. And I think about things like the TB303, the TB808, the drum machine and the bass synthesizer from Roland. Those were made originally to replace drummers and bassists, obviously not completely, and they didn't sound totally like a drummer or a bassist, but that was the intention of that, was you've got this TB303 and you're a live guitar player and you want to have a drummer and a bassist next to you while you're playing live, so you program the drum loop, which, side thought, I like to think of drum machines as prompt engineering now. It's kind of the same thing. You program that loop, you play that, and then you play your guitar and sing over it, and you don't have to get a drummer or a bassist. But what it's used for now, the person that was making the 808 or the 303 didn't expect the 303 to be used for acid house. Didn't expect someone to turn the resonance knob all the way up, hit go, and have it go, So like, I think that's one of the important things when you're making audio tools, is have some basic idea of what you're going for, but leave it open-ended enough people can take that and run with it and make things you wouldn't expect.
Yeah, there's a lot there to unpack, and I think a lot of those points are super relevant for this discussion. I think that's interesting too, because there's actually so many dimensions of this problem, right? Because in one sense, like at the beginning of this question, we were kind of saying, like this question of intent, right? And how to enable that kind of interaction to help the user get somewhere, is kind of if we are the tool maker, how do we anticipate this potential misappropriation that you're mentioning, Zach? Like, right, that's a really difficult thing, almost a meta analysis of our own approach that we might be considering there when we're building something. But yeah, I think there were a lot of interesting insights there, but I kind of thought something that you mentioned, Zach, might lead us into the second question that I wanted to focus on next, which kind of was around this idea that in some sense, I think there might be two common things that we hear people talk about when we hear AI and music discussed. One idea is, right, that you mentioned, Zach, was like a fear of like all music will sound the same once everyone starts using AI music systems, because it will just be regression to the mean, as you said, which is a common concern that I hear from people. At the same time, I think from musicians and music producers, there's also kind of the fear of being replaced as through automation and stuff like that as well. And so I kind of wanted to focus our discussion then on those questions, which in some sense, actually, it's really interesting, right? That they kind of actually seem like opposite things, like both can't be true in some sense to me. But yeah, Anna, I wonder if you have any thoughts on that point, and to put it more directly, I would say, how, for people out there that are, people that are going to be the users of these tools that we're talking about, right? How should they think about this space, and what should the dialogue between them and the tool designers be in order for that to kind of facilitate the growth of the space?
I feel like, for example, this contest is a really good kind of platform for that dialogue to happen. And I think in general, like making these models and tools more accessible, like more amenable to being part of the musician's workflow and creative process is really helpful, because that just allows for the experimentation that in some ways like adds to their process, as opposed to requires them to adopt a completely new process. So they can actually build on the expertise they've already developed and really like push the use of the tools towards what they're interested in. So I feel like the neural audio plugin competition is really, really timely and needed contest. So I'm just really happy that you are organizing it. For me, I also feel like things like organizing the AI song contest, for me personally, is kind of part of that, being able to kind of provide more kind of converging avenues for scientists and musicians to talk to each other, and in many situations being on the same team, kind of working towards the same kind of a bigger goal, but seeing like how our approaches are different and how to see like what are our needs, what is possible, and really kind of going through that calibration process very, very kind of very closely. I feel like, yeah, that kind of dialogue is really helpful. And maybe one other thing to add is a lot of times I think there is, for generative models, it's like we're trying to imitate a data set, like trying to model the data set very well. But maybe in some of these artistic domains, we have other objectives too. Maybe it's like building a model that can fail in many different ways, and maybe like the failure mode of the model is what we want. And later on, discovering those failure modes that are desirable, and then those might become the objective of like, yeah, creating these new sounds, creating these new ways of interacting or intercepting them. And so maybe there's an opportunity to kind of think about generative models in a different light.
Definitely, yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, I think there's a lot definitely there in that question of how generative models can help in the artistic context, right? Because generally, and again, I think Zach was definitely talking on this exact same point of like how, maybe we use the generative modeling as an objective to build our system, but it's actually not, like perfect reconstruction is not actually the goal, right? And maybe, like you said, those failure modes are actually what's interesting. And I think that actually, for me, that's one thing that interests me a lot about working in this particular space of kind of intersection of AI and music, because maybe in other AI fields, you just need to increase the accuracy, and that's what pays the bills. But in our case, we kind of sometimes need to find the way to get worse accuracy but still be interesting, right? And that's definitely a challenge, because it's not clear how to achieve that. I kind of also want to just bring in another idea on top of that. Aaron Hertzman, another researcher who works at Adobe, that's looked at a lot of questions around creativity in AI. He recently published a paper that had a really just interesting conceptual idea in it, that he was kind of arguing that we tend to often look at creative process as kind of a very linear process, or one that's like a point A to point B process, right? Like where the user is sitting down on the computer and what they want is to make a song. So we should say, okay, it's step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they made a song, or they've created an artwork in his case that he was looking at. And his claim there was that in reality, it's probably nothing like that in many cases of how a creative works. Like the creative person doesn't have a clear picture of what the final product is when they sit down, right? There's actually this kind of like tree of possibilities that they're exploring, and they may along the way discover something, a totally new direction. And it's really not until the end that they've gotten to the end that they know where they are, and they did never intended that initial result. And I think that's a big challenge in the context of AI and machine learning systems, because the way that we frame a lot of problems from kind of the mathematical context is that we have some objective function and a very clearly defined goal, right? And so I kind of wonder, if there's kind of any way that we better address that, in our practice. But Ali, I wonder if you could speak on that at all in your work, if this is a problem you've encountered or how you think about that problem.
Yeah, I think it's a great question and great point, because one of the challenges when we build AI systems is, we're very accustomed to, here's an input, here's an output. But what if I'm not fully happy with that output? And when we work with AI, it's not trivial to go from that initial output to, the next place. So I think the way the abstraction that I think about when building the intersection of a product experience and the underlying AI technologies, we need to make sure that whatever that 0 to 1 moment is, that is actionable. That from there I can have a mechanic to go to the next step, and at that next step is a new opportunity to go to the next one. So that's the way I think about it, and it's sometimes it's not easy, right? So, and I think it's a problem that it's not just about AI and technology. Is a human-computer interaction, is UX, and I think that if we are intentional that we're building a tool to empower human creation, that needs to be there, because it's true, many people obsess over accuracy or end-to-end. And to be clear, that can be of value for certain use cases. Maybe for, I'm not interested in being creative. I just want to type something and have amazing quality at the output, plug it into a video piece and upload it. But if we're talking about empowering creators, those mechanics need to be there. I love the analogy of this tree of options, because I totally agree with that. The creative process is never linear. And these tools need to allow you to, whatever node you are in that tree, they need to have an actionable mechanic to go to the next step and do it again and again and again. So yeah, that's my take on that. And yeah, and sometimes I guess the last thing to say, that is probably the most important thing. And that needs to be, if we're building creator tools, that needs to be a hard constraint. It sounds a little too hard, but I think that constraint needs to be there at the beginning, and then go backwards and see if the solution you're thinking of can actually deliver on that. And the answer might be not. And maybe you don't need to use AI in the first place, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges, definitely, in building these kinds of tools. Yeah, well, there was some great discussion, I think, on this kind of general topic of how we think about making the tools for creators using AI. But I want to shift gears a little bit to talk about maybe some slightly more technical aspects that I think will be of relevance to the people in the audience today that are interested, right, in building neural audio plugins. And I think two things that are kind of always in opposition to each other in our space of audio, basically, is this kind of need for potential real-time interaction with the system and the high compute costs of machine learning comparative to kind of traditional technologies. And I'm sure a lot of our participants have already struggled with that exact challenge in their submissions. And I think what's interesting also is, like, in the broader machine learning community, right, scaling has kind of taken off in a crazy way, right? And GPT-like models being the biggest example, probably. And so I kind of wanted to pose this question of, how should people that are looking to build models kind of, I guess, deal with that challenge, like of scaling? So kind of this like potential trade-off between scaling and real time, right? Because the kind of current existing tools we have that are real time require like very small neural networks or some sort of offline process otherwise that limits the interaction. And yeah, and so David, I wonder if you could speak a little bit to this, with your experience in working on the MOF plugin that, is directly trying to implement some sort of machine learning model. I'm wondering, more specifically, when you were designing that project and deciding to undertake it, could you speak at all, one, about like a little bit about your approach that enabled it to be real time, and also why, or what you think about that approach, and for future work, is that still the right direction, or are there other options that you think are available in terms of like bigger models, more capabilities and things like that?
Yeah, super interesting question, and a very tough problem to solve. In my mind, I think the reason that that particular differentiable DSP model, was doable in real time, was basically kind of down to how strong guardrails the output of the model, that DDSP section of it, imposes on what the kind of the model higher up the graph actually can output. So the neural network inside of that model is only predicting harmonic amplitudes and noise amplitudes, and so that places a very heavy restriction on what actually can come out of that synthesizer, and that's really what enables that model to be made much smaller than, say, some other type of model, like I don't know, like let's say WaveNet, for example. So I think that kind of baking in physical knowledge, I think there's some mileage there. You can consider that as a kind of a rudimental physical model of a harmonic instrument. Yeah, so I think that knowledge there is what allows that. Going forwards, I'm not sure. I'm not really sure. I think it's going to be very interesting to see what the technological advances are with being able to run larger models, potentially on different hardware in real time. People are trying to solve that problem right now. Yeah, the other thing we have to kind of bear in mind is that not all real-time audio problems are solvable more quickly by throwing more parallelism at the problem. Some things are just naturally dependent on the previous output, and you have a kind of a much more linear algorithm. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see where this goes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thanks for those points. Yeah, I feel like in some sense in audio, one of the challenges we have so far, is the expectation for real time, right? Like you already have this amazing suite of tools that users are already using day to day, in their DAW, for example, plugins, that they already have this expectation that this thing should be instantaneous. I should have no delay. So suddenly, I think one of the challenges, I've had myself in building neural audio plugins, and I think others, other participants have seen as well, of all of these kind of bottlenecks and challenges in building the real-time experience that becomes really challenging. And suddenly you have to say like, oh no, you have to wait a second, or oh no, this needs a higher latency as the designer in order to make it work. But suddenly the users already have this very high expectation for like very minimal latency. And I think sets a really high bar, right, to kind of build a tool that is accessible or usable by people that are already practitioners, because they have these high expectations. So I definitely think that's a big challenge. And I wonder, like, I kind of back on this question of the scale. I wonder, how much that impacts what people will be able to investigate, right? Because if we have this amazing model, but it takes forever to run, are people going to use it or not? And how do we convince people, if it is produce these really great results, but it takes a long time, how do we actually convince people to maybe be more patient with it, or to let it open, or to like wait for that and see something interesting come out of it? Yeah, I'm wondering, Anna, if you have any thoughts on that, or if you've encountered that problem in your own research as well, because I know you also have worked on some models that try to kind of work in a real-time context as well.
Yeah, I feel like as maybe some of the considerations are like HCI considerations for kind of building new kinds of interaction expectations. For example, I can imagine maybe like a more loop-based interaction where you in some ways like buys you some time to generate some of the material, or some of the material can be pre-generated, but you still have the feel of this kind of real-time interaction. And maybe another side of it in terms of building models, if the models needs to be kind of large, or they can actually be nimble and smaller, sometimes thinking about the use case could be helpful. Like maybe in the ultimate use case, we don't need a model that's very general kind of, but it's for a specific kind of performance, or even like a specific piece we want to be able to perform within, that has like certain patterns that we want more, and others is kind of like outside of the scope of that piece. So there could be ways to kind of be able to distill the model, or maybe even train it from the beginning with less data and kind of more intention of how it's used.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Ali, do you have anything you want to add onto this discussion?
Sure. I think there are just several points. I think the expectations aspect is something that can be addressed through good UX and also education, like the awareness, even if people don't know the exact details, but understanding that this is the nature of this process is fundamentally different compared to traditional real-time DSP, can also help relax a little bit on the expectation side. But I think more fundamentally, I think we should not underestimate how far we can go by combining the best of both worlds. I mean, we have over almost 5 decades of incredible DSP technology, including synthesis, and DDSP in a way is an attempt to do that, but I think it's the tip of the iceberg. I would like to see a lot more of parameter optimization on top of traditional DSP. I think we can go really, really far, and it's not mutually exclusive. I mean, we can do a lot on that end, and obviously certain problems you will need to have a machine learning model in place. And on the ML model side, yeah, there's definitely, I think we're entering an era that there's going to be this pushing forces. Some companies are going to push for larger models because in a way that gives them defensibility, because only they can run the APIs and stuff. But there's going to be also an opposing force towards, let's see if we can achieve the same capability with a smaller model that can run client side. So I think it's going to be a very healthy battle, and it's only going to translate into users having more access to more real time and more powerful capabilities.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, I also am really interested in seeing how that plays out, right? Those two different kind of sides of the coin of scale there. And I do think, yeah, as you said, like having players looking in both directions is probably the most beneficial for the field in general. Kind of related to that, I actually want to kind of tie into a question that someone on Twitter posed earlier, which they were asking, do you think that we need maybe a new plugin standard, or perhaps a new format for digital audio workstations to facilitate some of these questions or problems that we're having? Like maybe even this question of having to build neural audio plugins is in fact a limitation of the current system we have, and maybe a different ecosystem, I guess, of tools or ways of enabling developers to build tools could help this. Yeah, I'm curious, David, if you have any thought on that aspect of it.
Well, it's a tough question. I think we're already starting to see these plugin standards changing a little bit from just block in, block out. I think it was Melodyne who recently put out audio random access, and I might have misunderstood it wrong, but I believe it allows a plugin to inspect anywhere on a timeline, and questions of scaling aside, I think that's a really important step. Being able to look into the future is something that a lot of models rely on, and can open up a huge number of creative possibilities. So I think we're already starting to see that happen. As for whether there's kind of other things that they're missing, I suppose it might be nice to see other types of data coming to the inputs of plugins. At the moment, I'm just thinking about it, they've been kind of pretty limited to audio samples and MIDI events, and parameter change information as well in the VST case. I think if we had some other kind of measures of audio being able to either be defined by users or standardized in some way, that would be super interesting. I'd also potentially like to see some other inputs that are not necessarily as heavily tied to the Western European musical tradition coming in. I think we've all kind of, a lot of us have learned music around that, but it doesn't necessarily need to be tied to that so strongly. Yeah, I think that's about where my train of thought ends.
Awesome. Yeah, it's obviously a difficult question, and I do think myself that perhaps the kind of current state of DAW architectures is one thing that holds back some progression from the developer side of these building neural audio plugins, for example. But it's one of those things where anytime the developer sets out on that course to I'm going to build the next DAW, is kind of it's very ambitious and a very difficult, treacherous path to embark on, I think. But I kind of wanted to get another insight from Zach actually on something related to this, right? Because with the Dance Diffusion model, the kind of primary interface for that is a Colab notebook, right? So in some sense, I think you have some experience in at least talking to people that have used Dance Diffusion to generate samples, right? That are kind of you've convinced them to go outside of their comfort zone in some sense, right? Of working in a DAW, right? And to actually use Colab as a way to interface with the model and then perhaps take those samples into a DAW later, right? And manipulate them in part of their musical practice. And I'm curious if you have any findings or insights from people you've talked to or musicians you've talked to that have used Dance Diffusion. You know, how high of a burden has that been using Colab? And, you know, do you foresee, like, are you interested in a path in which something like Dance Diffusion goes into a plugin, or is that less interesting to you? Yeah, if you talk
definitely. I mean, I think that, you know, interfaces are one of the most important things in terms of actually getting AI models to be used, as we're seeing with like ChatGPT, where it's not necessarily a huge research breakthrough, but the accessibility and availability to it makes it, you know, actually what people end up using. So I think that, you know, right now Dance Diffusion is in Colab because that was just the easiest way to get it out there, get people to be able to use it without having to explain how to set up a local Python environment. But that's definitely not the end all and be all for how to use it. People in the community have already made command line tools, local GUIs to be able to do that, you know, export things directly to your DAW, that kind of thing, click and drag. And we definitely support that. You know, one of the difficulties with getting something like that into a VST, like we've been saying, is kind of the real-time expectation, the fact that it's all really long time offline rendering. So it's definitely, you know, it does take some extra activation energy for someone to leave the DAW and go do that. You know, we already kind of have some of a parallel to that with things like Splice, where they would leave the DAW to go in their Splice app website to go find the next sound or loop they want to use. So there's already kind of a, you know, existing offline outside of the DAW experience like that. And then for some people, you know, they'll have their sessions in the DAW be, you know, they'll do like a sound design session and then have a separate composition session. So it'd be kind of a similar thing to that, where you spend a couple hours in Colab or in your local GUI or whatever with Dance Diffusion trying to get some good sound and then pull that into your sample library in your DAW and use that as you would. But yeah, one of the difficulties there for getting it in the DAW is just the basic one of GPU access. And I think that's going to be when we're talking about different plugin standards, different kinds of software for this. I agree that it's really hard to convince anyone to leave their current DAW. You know, if that's one of the biggest conversations among producers is which DAW do you use? Why are you not switching to Bitwig? And you know, it's like, well, because I already know Ableton, I already know FL Studio or Logic or whatever, and people are, you know, platform locked because of their own experience. And that's you know, not a bad thing. I think it's important to meet people where they are, and not say that if you want to use this, you have to totally upend your entire life. That's almost, you know, hubris to say that. It's like, no, we want the artists to be able to use this stuff where they are. But yeah, I think that one of the biggest blockers for that, for getting these kinds of plugins into the DAW, is just the lack of native GPU support. So having to get all these models into like a torch script thing, like Rave has done, which is great work, incredible work to be able to make models that are fast enough to run on a CPU. But it's limiting, you know. So I think that things like they're saying that Melodyne audio random access, I haven't looked much into that, but I'm really curious about it. I think it will require some infrastructural changes, and I would hope that, you know, neural audio plugins and AI generative tools become ubiquitous enough that it kind of forces the hands of the various DAW developers to realize that they need to put that in. You know, I can hope that one DAW implement GPU access, and you can be the AI enabled whatever DAW, and all the other ones are like, oh, we really need that. We got to get that in there, because now no one can use X plugin that all the cool kids are using or whatever, right? So I think that just kind of that kind of puts it on us to make stuff cool and useful enough to try to make that happen. But you know, I can hope, and I think that's kind of where things are going right now, where a lot of there's a lot of neat stuff, particularly with, you know, this neural audio plugin competition, that I think that's kind of just the way that rendering is going. And I hope to see, you know, I obviously can only wish, but I hope to see the platform and the companies going that way.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think you're spot on with that. Like, it seems like we need that moment at which the momentum gets so large around neural audio effects and neural audio plugins that everyone suddenly feels like they need to get involved with that. And a lot of the players, right? And I guess another challenge we have in music tech world is that a lot of the players tend to be relatively slow moving, slow adoption of new ideas and tech. So I think, but kind of based on what you're saying, yeah, I feel like there will be some moment at which it's clear to everyone that, like, this is the way that things need to go, and there's going to be a lot of movement in making those things happen. I think we're probably close to that, and I think this competition is hopefully one of the starting points of that movement. So yeah, we're getting near the top of the hour, or the end of the hour here, and so in this portion, I kind of want to open it up now to anyone that's watching online. If you have any questions for the panelists, to go ahead and put them in the chat. And we can try to address some of those and pose them to the panelists here. So far, I think we've had awesome discussion, like so many great insights around these topics. And again, thank you all for your time in this panel. While we're waiting for any questions to come through, I want to touch on some questions that I collected earlier from people on Twitter that had a few interesting points to raise as well. I think I'll pose this one to Ale. Matt Rice asked, what specific long-term projects or kind of aspects of the research would you encourage, like, younger researchers that are starting a PhD or working in the space of AI and audio? You know, what would you encourage them to look at to kind of have something that would have wide adoption in the context of music tech?
Ooh, big question.
Yes. I'm interested in the answer. So,
well, I mean, I think it's pretty open-ended. I think we would need a little more context on kind of like the mission. What is it, the light at the end of the tunnel? You want to empower human creators, or you want to create more access or democratize access for more people to be part of the creative process? Top of my head, I mean, if the answer needs to be more technical, I think obviously neural audio synthesis is there's a lot to be done, but I guess my advice would be not not fall in love too much with, oh, it's all AI based. I think, again, as I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a really interesting interplay from traditional DSP and neural synthesis technology. I think that remains a pretty relevant intersection and a very defensible one when it comes to building actual consumer products that are cost effective from a business perspective. I'm giving an answer that's a blend of research direction and building actual products. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm sure I'm going to come up with more stuff, but I'm going to pass it to someone else to complement the answer.
Yeah, how about Anna? Do you have any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I feel like I think about Rebecca Fiebrink's work a lot in terms of the interactive machine learning aspect of really being able to do this kind of a human in the loop process where you're constantly interacting with the model, debugging the model, figuring out like what new data you need to add and seeing the impact of that and seeing kind of building like a causality kind of like how does these models work. I feel like thinking about like what is that version for us now that we have these new technologies and new ways of kind of expressive models I think would be really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. So we had one question in the chat from Julian Lenz, and he was directing this. Maybe Anna, you're a good person to answer this. He was asking, kind of in a related sense, what do you think specifically in the area of symbolic music generation? Where do you think the kind of biggest research questions are that remain, I guess, or that you're interested in specifically in the context of symbolic music generation?
I feel like being able to bridge symbolic and audio, kind of the sound aspects, and would be really interesting because definitely, like we hear and feel so much in the sound, and at the same time, there's a narrative of the symbolic story that's going on, and being able to kind of like go back and forth on those two and have the two influence each other, and kind of seeing how those hierarchies align at some point, and I think would be a really interesting kind of exploration and enable new ways of interacting with music.
Definitely. Yeah, I think definitely that connection seems like it's right. It's one of the things that's like you could have a great audio, like raw audio synthesis model, and you could have a great symbolic domain model, but it feels that there's still something lacking if you don't have that connection, because you kind of want that intermediate representation, right, to somehow be there in both of those models, right? Yeah, that's super interesting. We had another question here from Steve in the chat, and I'm kind of going to paraphrase a little bit what he was asking, but I think in some sense what he was getting at was about whether there, the trade-off between, let's say, a client-side application in the browser to deploy a tool versus using GPUs that run on the client's machine versus a server that is running GPUs, right? All of those kind of different design paradigms for deploying kind of a machine learning model. And I wonder about that, right? Because in some sense, there's a question of how, like in some sense, as the designer of an AI system, we even need to consider how we're going to deploy it before we've built it, because it's going to impact what we can achieve. Yeah, and Ali, I wonder if you had any insights into that question, because I know a lot of the apps and applications you've worked on have kind of had to answer that question potentially.
Sure. Yeah, I think it goes back. If we are in an industry setting, we need to start from the constraints. Even when we don't know exactly the specific product that we're building, we need to think in terms of value and go backward. And that kind of like narrows down the search space for a solution, right? I think, I think that the hybrid model is here to stay. I think it's going to be very flexible way of thinking in terms of building products. And in a way, it's also compatible with the next generation of creative interfaces that we're already seeing in other domains, right? Like in design and stuff. So, yeah, I think, I'm not sure if I'm answering that question directly, but I see that us seeing more of that, and it's gonna come down to good judgment in designing systems to know this should run client side, this can run client side, it should run server side, and it's not only about technical constraints. We need to take into account privacy of models, privacy of data. So it's an interesting equation. But web is probably the default real estate and surface to make all these things happen.
Definitely. Thanks for that. David, do you have any points to add on that? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. Not really. No.
Okay.
I agree with it fully. Just one tiny little point. Just one personal interest of mine. I think that I'm really excited by the idea of using these hybrid approaches to kind of have worldwide interaction in real time. And I think you don't necessarily need to be sending audio across the world. You can be sending control data. And if everybody around the world is kind of like sharing the same sort of algorithm, then you can kind of do performances in a distributed way quite cheaply from a technological standpoint. So I think that's really exciting and basically fully behind the idea of this hybrid approach. I love it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Yeah, awesome. So we're getting very close to the end of our time here, and I want to be mindful of our panelists' time as well. So yeah, thanks so much everyone for being here. I want to kind of close out with one final question that I'm going to rapid fire go through all of the panelists here. And this was a question that was posed by CJ from DataBots, and he asked if you were to invent or to use AI to invent a new genre of music by combining or subtracting different existing genres, what genre would you invent? And I'm going to start off with Zach, and you have less than 30 seconds to give your answer.
Sousa step. Big fan of John Philip Sousa's marching music and dubstep. So give me that. Something like that.
Awesome. David.
Well, I really love the magic of just like discovering this entire new music scene that you just didn't know existed, and then just diving deep into that and like getting really into that. So I would ask it to invent me something that was most different to what I'd heard so far.
Okay, nice. Ale.
Yeah. I don't know. I keep dreaming about this moment where we have a 3D, 2D interface, and we can move between artists, and it's more like a meta genre, and preview that sound and say, oh, this is what I'm feeling today. So
awesome.
A long way to get there, but that would be my aspiration.
And Anna.
Yeah, I feel like there's so much like sound in nature that's really, really interesting. So I feel like using technology to be able to capture and translate and kind of reimagine those sounds and kind of at different time scales would be really interesting.
Definitely. Wow. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, well, thank you so much to all of our panelists for lending their time for this discussion. I think there was so many insights in this discussion. I'm going to have to go back and watch it again myself to get all of these interesting insights down. Thanks everyone for joining today. And yeah, the competition, again, the deadline is today. So thanks to everyone that's submitted so far. The form is still open if you want to make more submissions, but we will kind of officially have the cutoff at midnight GMT today. So if you're still working on your submission, finish it up and send it to us as soon as you can. We've already gotten some really awesome submissions, so we're really excited for the final judging, which will happen next week in the live stream. But I'll pass it off to Josh to give us any other closing remarks.
Yeah, that's about it. Maybe I'd take a moment to thank our sponsors and supporters for who have been supporting the neural audio competition, and not just list them up. So big shout out to TikTok and David, who helped make that happen. The Cosmo, of course, represented by Andrew, Juice, Cycling 74 has been very supportive. GPU Audio, big shout out to Sasha, who's been active in the live chat today, and big shout out to MathWorks, who have helped to supply some provisional licenses for MATLAB. Thank you to all of them, and also to everybody who's been tuning in, who's been taking interest in this, and everybody who's been participating in the competition. There's been an amazing response. Feels like there's some really positive energy around this, and I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes in the future. Thank you to all of our panelists who have joined us today, have taken time out of their busy days, and we hope to see you all again soon. And with that, I think we can sign off. Any thoughts from yourself, Andrew? Anything you'd like to say before we sign off?
I would just like to thank everyone so far and first of all, thank everyone that's submitted to the contest. It's been amazing how many submissions we've received, and the bar and the quality that we've seen is just incredible. So it's just been a dream of mine to see more and more people adopt like this technology and be more aware of this sort of field of research, and to see so many people engage with this has been fantastic. So we've got our one last live stream, I think, coming up, where we'll have a sort of a final speaker, and on actually we'll be talking about symbolic models next week, actually, generative MIDI models. So we've got another member from Cosmo who will be talking about that, and then we'll also be doing the reveal of the prizes and the winners and stuff like that. So very excited to sort of review and have our judging panel attend to give their remarks on all the great submissions we've had. So thank you to everyone, and yeah, thank you everyone in the panel today for turning up and having this great discussion.
Great. All right, everybody, have a great morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you may be in the world. Have a safe weekend, and we will see you again soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.